I'm reminded as I look at the passage before me, and if you have a Bible with you, if you would turn to Psalm 145, beginning in verse 8. I'm reminded a lot, as my son Josh was speaking earlier regarding the subject of worship. I'm reminded of that particular portion of Pilgrim's Progress. After Christians visit to Vanity Fair in the city of Vanity, when having lost the companionship of faithful and acquired a new companion in hopeful, they are traveling the King's Highway. And there, along the way, they discover a parallel pathway, which seems to be somewhat easier, at least to the feet, and is very tempting. And before long, after a little conversation, they take that softer pathway, always with the understanding to keep the King's pathway, the highway, in sight. So if ever this other pathway seems to divert too far away, that they can always back up and go to the King's Highway, and that way not get in trouble. Well, little do they know, they proceed down this softer pathway, engage in conversation. Before they know it, they are out of sight of the King's Highway. A very truthful lesson about how easily it is for us to get off of the path of righteousness, get off the path of what is true, what is scriptural, what is the accurate picture, if you will. Many times, we have within the church, we have a calling. We have a calling to portray to this world an accurate picture of Christ. An accurate picture of salvation, of truth. We have been given a mandate to take God's Word to this generation of people who need to hear it, to need to hear it desperately. It's our responsibility. And in that calling, we need to make sure that what we portray is the right image. But in order to do that, we always have to come back to the accurate picture. Because we can easily take one step away from it and not even realize that we've done it. What I want you to do is look here in Psalm 145, beginning in verse 8, because here we have a very accurate picture of the very thing that the Lord would have us show our world of Himself. And even as we read this, I want you to think about the picture that Jesus Himself gave as He walked the face of this earth in the Gospels. Think about, as we read this, the Gospel portrayal of Christ. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and His mercy is over all that He has made. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to the children of man your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. The Lord is faithful in all His words and kind in all His It's interesting here. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and His mercy is over all that He has made. I can imagine as you look through the Gospels and as you think through, and the reason why I say that is because did not Jesus Himself declare to us that when you have seen me, you have seen the Father, for I and the Father are one. So if we want an accurate picture of God the Father, whom do we look to? We look to Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is the God-man. Jesus is God in the flesh. He is Emmanuel, God with us. And so He becomes the very presence of God in our midst. He is the image that we see. And as He interacts with people in the Gospels, though there are times He does get angry, He does get frustrated. But normally He gets frustrated with one group of people more so than any other. It's usually the Pharisees. If He goes toe-to-toe with any one group of people, it is that group. And He gets frustrated with them for one reason. Because they are the ones who studied the Old Testament. They are the ones who had the revelation of God. They are the ones who should have seen Him coming. But because of all of the layers and layers and layers and layers of private interpretation that they had placed upon the Old Testament, they could not see truth standing before them. And so when He confronted them with it, instead of receiving Him, they rejected Him and therefore incurred His wrath. But to the remainder of the people that He dealt with, to the prostitutes, to the tax collectors, to the fishermen with very little education, He portrayed Himself as compassionate, as loving, as kind. Even when in the times when His disciples blessed their hearts, when He wanted so much for them to see Him for who He was. I'm reminded of the time when after a full day of teaching, Jesus said, let's climb into the boat, let's cross the Sea of Galilee, and His disciples went with Him. Here they are, experienced fishermen. They get halfway across the way. Jesus is sound asleep in the boat. Storm comes up, overtakes the boat. And here are these experienced fishermen. They get scared to death. They fear that they will drown. And they shake Jesus awake. And so He stands and He declares 3 words. Peace, be still. And the storm abates immediately. And the disciples sit there in awe. Who is this man? That even the wind and the waves obey Him. And Jesus says, oh ye of little faith. You know. He says that over and over and over and over again to them. He puts up with the fact that they exhibit very little trust in Him. But nonetheless, He loves them. He loves them with an unconditional love. A love that is boundless. And indeed, He loves us with the very same love. It's almost as if in our walk with Christ, how many times have we heard those same words? Maybe even in our spiritual ears.